6 months after the last Scorpion Syndicate stronghold fell, the galaxy had become a very different place. The criminal organizations that had operated freely for centuries were gone. Pirates who had terrorized trade routes for generations were either captured or had fled to the furthest edges of known space. Ambassador So Young returned to Unity Prime, but not as the patient mediator she had been before. She came as the representative of a species that had proven itself capable of both perfect diplomacy and absolute warfare. The other species who had once dismissed human concerns now hung on her every word. The first session of the reformed Galactic Council was unlike any diplomatic meeting in galactic history. Instead of the chaotic arguments and posturing that had become normal, the chamber was filled with respectful attention as So Young presented humanity's new terms for galactic cooperation. The humans had prepared a comprehensive set of protocols for how species would interact with each other. Going forward, unlike the old system where violations were met with stern letters and empty threats, the new agreements were backed by the most powerful military force the galaxy had ever seen. Admiral Sung Min established the Human Defense Force with bases strategically placed throughout the galaxy. But this was not an occupation army designed to control other species. Instead, it was a peacekeeping organization dedicated to maintaining the stability that humans had worked so hard to create through 3 centuries. Of patient diplomacy, the Defense Force motto was simple but profound: peace through strength, justice through action. Every species in the galaxy knew that violations of galactic law would be met with swift and overwhelming response, but also that cooperation would be rewarded with protection and support. Captain Hyunwoo found himself in command of the New Galactics Patrol, a joint force that combined human ships with volunteer vessels from species who wanted to work alongside the galaxy's most effective military. The patrol's mission was to maintain peace when diplomacy succeeded and enforce it when diplomacy failed. The patrol ships were a visible reminder throughout the galaxy that the age of unchecked criminal activity was over. Pirates, raiders, and other criminals discovered that space had suddenly become a much more dangerous place for their operations, while honest traders and peaceful travelers found their journeys safer than they had been in centuries. Captain Nari was given command of the Outer Rim Defense Fleet, responsible for protecting the smaller species who had been most vulnerable to pirate attacks. The Fluffkins, who had nearly become slaves to the Drachnoids, now lived under the protection of human military might. But the most important change was not in military arrangements, but in how species treated each other in daily interactions. Dr. Yoon Seo, now serving as head of interspecies relations, noted that respect had replaced condescension in diplomatic communications across the galaxy. Species that had previously made unreasonable demands in negotiations now came to the table with fair offers. The Drachnoids stopped threatening smaller species and began offering genuine protection agreements with reasonable terms. The Mantoids learned to ask politely for fishing rights instead of demanding them. The Aquarians, who had been among the first to respect human wisdom, became some of humanity's strongest supporters in the new galactic order. Their representatives often praised human restraint during the campaign against the Scorpion Syndicate, noting that any other species with such overwhelming power might have used it to conquer rather than to protect. Lieutenant Minho established the Galactic Justice Office, which processed criminal cases according to fair and consistent standards. Pirates and other criminals could no longer escape consequences by fleeing to different sectors or bribing corrupt officials. Justice followed them wherever they went. The office maintained detailed records of every crime and every punishment, ensuring that patterns of criminal behavior were identified and stopped before they could grow into larger threats. The galaxy learned that human attention to detail was just as effective in law enforcement as it had been in diplomacy. Young aliens studying galactic history in schools across the galaxy learned about the moment when humanity's patience finally broke. It became a standard lesson taught in both military academies and diplomatic schools, the importance of never mistaking restraint for inability. The lesson was always presented the same way: never confuse patience with weakness. Never assume that peaceful people cannot choose war when war becomes necessary. Never underestimate a species that chooses peace but is fully capable of violence. But the most important lesson was about the nature of true strength. The humans had shown that real power lay not in the ability to destroy but in the wisdom to know when destruction was necessary and the capability to make it swift and decisive. When that moment arrived, Captain Hyunwoo often stood at the same observation window where he had watched the stars during the dark days before New Busan. Now, when he looked out at the galaxy, he saw something different. Trade ships moved safely along routes that had been terrorized for centuries. Diplomatic vessels carried negotiators who came to meetings with respect rather than arrogance. The galaxy had learned that human patience was not unlimited, but it was also not withdrawn lightly. Species that dealt fairly with humans found them to be the same helpful allies they had always been. Only those who chose to abuse human goodwill discovered the consequences of their actions. Ambassador So Young kept a small memorial in her office for the victims of New Busan. 2 million names were inscribed on crystal panels that caught the light from the observation windows. She had promised that their deaths would not be forgotten and that the galaxy would be safer because of their sacrifice. The promise had been kept. Criminal organizations that had operated for centuries were gone. Species that had preyed on the weak were now held accountable for their actions. The galaxy was more peaceful than it had been in generations precisely, because everyone now understood the true cost of breaking that peace. Years later, when historians wrote about this period, they called it the Great Awakening, the moment when the galaxy realized that its peacekeepers were not weak servants but powerful guardians who had chosen mercy over might, for as long as mercy remained effective. The humans had returned to their role as diplomatic mediators, but now their words carried the weight of demonstrated capability. When humans suggested solutions to problems, other species listened, not out of politeness but out of genuine respect for beings who had proven they could back up their words with actions. The galaxy had learned the most important lesson of all that. True peace could only exist when it was protected by those strong enough to defend it, and wise enough to know when defense became necessary. The human military response began exactly 72 hours after Ambassador So Young announced humanity's withdrawal from galactic diplomacy. It was not the chaotic violence that most species expected from angry warriors, but something far more terrifying, a perfectly coordinated operation that demonstrated the true nature of human patience. Commander Ji-hoon led the first strike against the Scorpion Syndicate's main headquarters hidden in the Broken Rings asteroid field. For decades, the pirates had used this location because it was considered impossible to attack. The asteroids moved in unpredictable patterns and the gravity fields made navigation deadly for most species. The human fleet arrived like ghosts moving through the asteroid field as if the chaotic gravity meant nothing to them. Their ships flowed around the massive rocks with precision that seemed impossible. Within minutes, they had surrounded the pirate base that had never been successfully attacked in over a century. But this was not a typical military assault designed to destroy everything in sight. Instead, it was a surgical operation that showed exactly why humans had been successful diplomats for so long. They understood their enemies completely, and they knew exactly how to achieve their goals with minimum waste. The human ships disabled the pirate vessels without destroying them. They captured the criminal leaders alive instead of killing them. They secured evidence of crimes that could be used in proper legal proceedings. Even in their anger, even after the horror of New Busan, the humans followed rules of engagement that were stricter than most species used during peacetime. Commander Ji-hoon personally led the boarding party that captured the pirate leader Vexka, who had planned and ordered the New Busan massacre. The alien criminal expected to be executed immediately or tortured for information about other pirate operations. Instead, he was treated according to galactic war crime protocols and informed that he would receive a fair trial. The galaxy watched in amazement as human forces moved through space with coordination that seemed impossible. Every ship knew exactly where it needed to be and when it needed to be there. Every action served a larger purpose that became clear only when the entire operation was complete. Captain Nari commanded a squadron of human destroyers that demonstrated tactical brilliance beyond anything the galaxy had seen before. Her ships moved like they were extensions of her own thoughts, responding to threats before they fully formed and striking with precision that made veteran warriors question their own abilities. The most shocking discovery was that human weapons were not designed just to kill but to disable and capture. While other species built weapons for maximum destruction, Humans had developed technology that could stop enemies without necessarily destroying them. They had options that other species never considered. When the mantoid hive queen demanded to know why humans were not slaughtering their enemies like proper warriors, Captain Nari explained something that would be quoted in military academies for generations. "We are not here for revenge," she said. "We are here to make sure this never happens again." The human campaign against the Scorpion Syndicate lasted exactly 3 weeks. In that time, they dismantled a criminal organization that had terrorized the galaxy for over 2 centuries. They captured or eliminated every major pirate leader and destroyed every hidden base and supply depot. But what impressed the galaxy most was not the speed or efficiency of the human victory. It was the restraint they showed even while demonstrating overwhelming superiority. Human forces provided medical aid to wounded pirates. They offered surrender terms that were more generous than most peace treaties. They followed their own moral code even when dealing with enemies who had shown no mercy. Lieutenant Minho found himself in charge of processing hundreds of captured pirates and criminals. Each prisoner was catalogued and their crimes documented, with the same careful attention to detail that humans brought to everything else. Even their enemies received better treatment than they had given their own victims. The galaxy began to understand that human patience had never been weakness but rather strength under perfect control. When humans chose to talk instead of fight, it was because they were confident in their ability to win any conflict that might result from failed negotiations. The Drachnoids, who had been so dismissive of human military capabilities, found themselves studying human tactics with desperate attention. Their own warriors admitted privately that they had never seen such perfect combination of overwhelming force and precise control. The Aquarians discovered that human naval tactics were beyond their understanding. Human ships moved through space, with the fluid grace that Aquarians thought only they possessed, but combined with tactical awareness that made their own fleet commanders look like amateurs. Even the proud Rockhearts, who had walked out of human-mediated negotiations, began sending messages asking if the humans might consider returning to diplomatic service. The galaxy was quickly remembering why they had needed human peacekeepers in the first place. Dr. Yunseo found herself processing intelligence reports that revealed the true scope of criminal activity that had been growing while everyone assumed the galaxy was peaceful. The Scorpion Syndicate had been only the largest and most visible of dozens of criminal organizations that had been taking advantage of the peace that humans had worked so hard to maintain. Every captured pirate ship contained evidence of attacks on civilian vessels from multiple species. The criminals had not been targeting only humans, but had seen human patience as a sign that they could attack anyone without serious consequences. The New Busan massacre had been intended as a message to the entire galaxy that no one was safe. The charity human response sent a very different message. It demonstrated that there was a vast difference between choosing peace and being incapable of war. Species that chose peace from a position of strength commanded respect in a way that species who chose peace from weakness never could. As the last pirate stronghold fell to human forces, the galaxy realized that the balance of power had shifted permanently. The humans had proven that their diplomatic success had never been due to weakness or luck, but rather to their complete understanding of both their own capabilities and those of everyone else. The peaceful giants had revealed their true nature, and the galaxy would never make the mistake of underestimating human patience again. More importantly, they had learned that human mercy was a gift that could be withdrawn when it was abused by those who mistook kindness for weakness. The age of taking advantage of human goodwill was over, and a new era of genuine respect for human power had begun. What the galaxy discovered in the weeks following the New Busan massacre was that humans had never stopped being warriors. They had simply chosen to be diplomats instead. While other species focused on either talking or fighting, humans had quietly mastered both skills during their 3 centuries of peace. Admiral Sung Min had spent 40 years serving in what most species believed was a ceremonial position. Human military forces were considered outdated relics from an earlier time when humans were still learning to be civilized. The other species thought human weapons were museum pieces, and human soldiers were just for parades and ceremonies. They were catastrophically wrong. The Admiral stood in the command center of Terra Prime, the hidden military headquarters that existed in the shadow of Earth itself. For 300 years, this facility had been disguised as an agricultural research station. Visiting aliens had toured the upper levels, seeing scientists working on better crops and more efficient farming methods. They never saw the 60 levels that went deep underground where the real work was being done. They never suspected that the friendly researchers showing them around were actually military engineers who had spent decades perfecting weapon systems that made the most advanced alien technology look like Stone Age tools. Captain Hyun Woo arrived at Terra Prime, still wearing his diplomatic uniform, but now carrying orders that activated protocols no living human had ever seen implemented. The peaceful exploration vessels he had commanded were revealed to be something entirely different when their hidden weapon systems came online. His ship, the Harmony, had been designed to look like a simple scientific vessel with comfortable quarters for alien diplomats and laboratories for studying plant samples from different worlds. What the aliens had not realized was that every diplomatic meeting room contained concealed weapons, and every laboratory could be converted to military functions within minutes. The transformation was remarkable to watch. Walls that had displayed peaceful artwork slid away to reveal tactical displays showing every star system within 1,000 light years. Furniture that had been designed for comfortable conversations converted into command stations and weapons control centers. But the ships were only part of what humans had been hiding. Every human colony world that appeared to be focused on farming or mining or manufacturing had been building something else entirely. The peaceful settlers who had seemed so vulnerable were actually highly trained military personnel who had been waiting for centuries for orders that they hoped would never come. Dr. Yunseo had been working as a xenobiologist, studying alien cultures and writing papers about peaceful coexistence between species. Her real job had been mapping the weaknesses and military capabilities of every species in the galaxy. She knew which species were truly powerful and which ones only appeared strong because no one had ever tested them. Her research files contained detailed analysis of every alien military force, including their weapons technology, battle tactics, and psychological weaknesses. She had identified which species would fight to the death and which ones would surrender when faced with overwhelming force. Most importantly, she had figured out exactly how to defeat each of them with minimum casualties on both sides. The galaxy had always wondered why humans were so good at diplomatic negotiations. They assumed it was natural talent or cultural wisdom. The truth was that humans understood their opponents completely because they had been studying them as potential enemies for 300 years while smiling and serving them tea. Lieutenant Minho was given access to intelligence files that revealed the true scope of human preparation. Every pirate base, every criminal organization, and every corrupt government in the galaxy had been mapped and analyzed. The humans knew exactly where their enemies were hiding and exactly how to find them. The Scorpion Syndicate, which had been so proud of their successful attack on New Busan, suddenly found themselves being hunted by an enemy they did not understand. Their secret bases were being discovered and destroyed. Their communication networks were being infiltrated and shut down. Their supply lines were being cut with surgical precision. What terrified the pirates most was how the humans seemed to know everything about their operations. Safe houses that had been hidden for decades were being raided. Leaders who had never revealed their identities were being captured. The humans were not just attacking randomly, they were systematically dismantling the entire criminal network. The truth was that humans had been watching and waiting for centuries. Every time a human ship was attacked or a human colony was threatened, the information was recorded and filed away. The humans had been building the most complete intelligence network in galactic history, while everyone thought they were just being friendly diplomats. Captain Nari found herself in command of a battle fleet that made the combined forces of all warrior species look like a small patrol group. The ships had been hidden in plain sight, disguised as cargo vessels and research platforms, scattered throughout human space. When the activation codes were transmitted, they revealed their true nature as the most advanced warships ever constructed. The alien intelligence services, which had always dismissed human military capabilities as primitive and outdated, suddenly found themselves completely blind. Human worlds that had seemed defenseless were now showing energy signatures that indicated massive defensive systems. Human civilians were demonstrating military training that most warrior species would consider advanced. The galaxy began to understand that when humans talked about choosing peace, They had meant something very specific. They were not weak creatures who avoided war because they were afraid. They were incredibly dangerous beings who preferred peace because they understood the true cost of war better than anyone else. The difference was crucial. A weak species that avoided fighting was not peaceful, they were just weak. But a strong species that chose peace over war despite being capable of total victory, that was true strength. That was power held in check by wisdom and moral conviction. The Drachnoids, who had been so dismissive of human capabilities, found their own military. Analysts delivering reports that they refused to believe. According to their intelligence, the human military had technological advantages in every category, including some weapon systems that the Drachnoids did not even understand. The Aquarians discovered that their sacred oceans were being monitored by human sensors so advanced that they could track individual fish across entire planetary systems. The humans had been watching everyone for centuries, learning their secrets and preparing for possibilities that they hoped would never become necessary. As the human military machine began to move, the galaxy finally understood what they had been dealing with for 300 years. They had not been protected by weak peacekeepers who begged everyone to get along. They had been protected by the most powerful military force in galactic history, whose leaders had chosen to use words instead of weapons, for as long as words remained effective. Now words were no longer enough, and the galaxy was about to see what human patience had been holding back for 3 centuries. The emergency alert came through the communication systems at exactly 3 a.m. station time. Captain Hyun-woo was pulled from his sleep by the harsh sound of the priority alarm that was only used for the most serious emergencies. He rolled out of bed and activated his personal communication device, expecting news of another trade dispute or diplomatic crisis. What he saw instead made his blood turn cold. The message was from New Busan, a peaceful human colony world known for its beautiful farming valleys and quiet communities. The planet was home to nearly 2 million humans who had built a life growing food and raising families, far from the busy trade lanes and political centers of the galaxy. The transmission was broken and filled with static, but the words that came through were clear enough. Under attack, multiple ships. They are not taking prisoners. Send help. The signal cut off after that, leaving only empty space where a thriving human world had been just hours before. Hyun-woo ran through the corridors of Unity Prime toward the human diplomatic section. Other species he passed looked at him with mild curiosity, wondering why the normally calm human seemed so urgent. He did not stop to explain or make polite conversation as he usually did. Ambassador So Young was already in the emergency communication center when he arrived. Her face was pale, and her usually perfect diplomatic composure was cracking around the edges. She was trying to reach New Busan through every communication channel available, but getting only silence in return. The details came in slowly over the next few hours as rescue ships finally reached the colony world. What they found there would haunt every human who saw the reports for the rest of their lives. The Scorpion Syndicate had not just attacked the colony, they had destroyed it completely and deliberately. The pirate fleet had arrived during the night, when most of the colonists were sleeping. But this was not a quick raid for supplies or valuables. The attack had been planned and organized with the specific goal of causing as much suffering as possible. They had targeted the schools first, making sure that human children would not survive to grow up. The medical centers were bombed so that the wounded could not be treated. The agricultural domes that fed the colony were not just destroyed but poisoned, so that nothing would ever grow there again. Young engineer Minji had been working the late shift at the communication center when the attack began. She managed to keep the transmission equipment working long enough to send out detailed reports of what was happening. Her voice became the witness to horrors that no peaceful species should have had to endure. The attackers made sure the colonists knew this was not random violence but a message to all humans across the galaxy. They broadcast their intentions on all frequencies, saying that the peaceful humans were weak and that weakness made them perfect victims. They wanted other human colonies to know that they could be next. Minji kept transmitting until the very end, describing how the pirates were not just killing but taking time to cause fear and pain. Her final message was a list of the pirate ships she had identified and a promise that someone would remember what had happened here. When the rescue ships finally arrived 12 hours later, they found a world that had been turned into a graveyard. Nearly 2 million humans were dead or missing. The few survivors were badly injured and traumatized. The beautiful farming valleys had been turned into smoking craters. The footage from New Busan reached every human world within days through the quantum communication network. Ambassador So Young watched it in her private quarters aboard Unity, Prime with tears streaming down her face. For 30 years she had dedicated her life to preventing exactly this kind of tragedy through patient diplomacy. But diplomacy had not saved New Busan. Talking had not protected those families. All of her careful negotiations and peaceful solutions had not stopped the pirates from murdering 2 million innocent people simply because they could. For the first time in her long diplomatic career, So Young felt something she had never experienced before. It was not sadness or fear or even anger. It was something colder and more focused. It was the complete absence of mercy for those who had chosen to show no mercy to others. Across the galaxy, humans stopped what they were doing to watch the same footage. Teachers paused their lessons. Farmers left their fields. Engineers stopped their work. Diplomats walked out of meetings. For the first time in 300 years, the galaxy was seeing humans react with something other than patient understanding. A reaction was unlike anything the other species had ever witnessed from the peaceful humans. There was no weeping or wailing or emotional outbursts. Instead, there was a quiet stillness that seemed to spread from human world to human world, like a wave of controlled fury. Captain Nari was commanding a human exploration vessel near the outer rim when she received the New Busan footage. She watched it once in complete silence, then called her crew together. Without saying a word, she began updating their ship systems and checking weapons that had not been activated in decades. Lieutenant Min Ho was attending a diplomatic function on the Aquarian homeworld when the news reached him. He excused himself politely from the party and returned to his quarters, where he began sending coded messages to human military personnel across the galaxy. The messages were simple and identical. The time for patience had ended. All human diplomatic personnel were to return to human space immediately. All human trade agreements were suspended. All human participation in galactic peacekeeping was terminated, effective immediately. The Galactic Council called an emergency session within hours of receiving these notifications. They expected the humans to ask for help or demand justice through the proper diplomatic channels. They thought the humans would want to discuss new security measures or request a joint investigation. Instead, Ambassador So Young appeared before the assembled representatives of 40 species and delivered a message that would be remembered for thousands of years. Her voice was calm and measured as always, but something in her eyes made even the warrior drachnoids shift uncomfortably in their seats. She announced that humanity was withdrawing from all diplomatic activities immediately. Every human mediator, peacekeeper, and negotiator was being recalled to human space. The species that had served as the galaxy's diplomatic backbone for 3 centuries was walking away from the table. The immediate reaction was panic. Without human mediation, the Mantoids and Aquarians resumed their fishing rights dispute within hours. The Drachnoids began making new territorial demands on smaller species. Trade agreements that had been stable for decades suddenly became sources of conflict. But the humans were not just leaving. They were preparing for something that no species in the galaxy had ever seen before. The peaceful giants were about to show everyone what 300 years of suppressed military development looked like when it was finally unleashed. The galaxy had mistaken human patience for weakness. They were about to learn the difference between a species that could not fight and a species that chose not to fight. The lesson would be swift, brutal, and absolutely unforgettable. Captain Hyunwoo stood at the large window of Unity Prime looking out at the endless stars. The massive space station was home to over 40 different alien species who came here to solve problems and make deals. For 300 years, humans had been the ones everyone turned to when fights broke out or when no one could agree on something important. The station buzzed with activity as beings from across the galaxy walked through the wide corridors. Blue-skinned Aquarians moved like water through the halls while insect-like Mantoids clicked and chattered in their own language. Proud warrior Drachnoids stood tall and straight, always ready for a fight, but even they would listen when humans spoke. Ambassador So Young had been working on Unity Prime for over 20 years. She was known throughout the galaxy as someone who could find answers when others only found anger. Her office walls were covered with peace treaties and trade agreements that she had helped create. Every document represented hours of patient talking and careful thinking. Young diplomat Tae-min worked as her assistant, and he often wondered how humans stayed so calm. Just yesterday, the mantoids and Aquarians had almost started a war over fishing rights in the Outer Rim. The mantoids wanted to harvest the sea creatures for food, while the Aquarians said those same creatures were sacred to their religion. Any other species would have picked a side or walked away from the problem. Instead, So Young spent 3 days listening to both groups. She asked questions about their needs and their fears. She learned about mantoid hunger during their breeding season, and about Aquarian religious ceremonies that happened once every 10 years. When she finally called both sides together, she had a solution that nobody else had thought of. The mantoids could harvest during certain months when the creatures were not needed for Aquarian ceremonies. In return, the Aquarians would share their knowledge of sea farming, so the mantoids could grow their own food sources. Both species left happy and grateful. The mantoids would not go hungry, and the Aquarians could continue their religious practices. It was exactly the kind of solution that made humans famous across the galaxy as peacemakers. But lately, things had been changing in ways that worried the human diplomats. Reports came in daily from human colonies scattered across the galaxy. Trade. Ships were being attacked by pirates who seemed to know exactly when and where the ships would be traveling. Several species had started claiming planets that humans had discovered and settled, claiming they had been there first. The Scorpion Syndicate had become especially bold in their attacks on human vessels. They were a mixed group of different species, who made their living by stealing and destroying. They seemed to think that because humans always chose talking over fighting, that humans were easy targets. What made it worse was how other species were starting to treat humans in negotiations. The Drachnoids, who used to respect human wisdom, now made demands instead of requests. The crystal beings called Rockhearts began walking out of meetings when they did not get everything they wanted right away. Species that had been grateful for human help now acted like that help was something they deserved. Tae-min noticed the change during a recent trade discussion between the Drachnoids and a smaller species called the Fluffkins. The Fluffkins were small furry creatures who were very good at growing food but not very good at defending themselves. The Drachnoids wanted to take over 3 Fluffkin farming worlds in exchange for protection from pirates. In the old days, this would have been simple. Humans would suggest a fair trade agreement where Drachnoids provided protection in exchange for a reasonable amount of food. Both sides would benefit, and everyone would be happy. Instead, the Drachnoid leader had looked right at Tae-min and said that humans should stay out of affairs between warrior species and their natural subjects. The words hit like a physical blow. The Drachnoids were saying that the Fluffkins were not equals, but property to be owned. So Young had kept her diplomatic smile, but Tae-min saw something flash in her eyes that he had never seen before. It was gone so quickly he almost thought he had imagined it. She spent the next 6 hours working out a deal that saved the Fluffkins from becoming slaves, but the Drachnoids made it clear they were only agreeing because they did not want to deal with the paperwork of a formal complaint. After the meeting, So Young sat in her office staring at nothing. Tae-min brought her tea and waited for her to speak. Finally, she looked up at him with tired eyes. "The galaxy thinks we are weak," she said quietly. "They think because we choose peace that we cannot choose war. They think patience means we are afraid to fight." Tae-min wanted to say something comforting, but he knew she was right. He had seen the way other species looked at humans now. There was no respect in their eyes anymore, only calculation. They were testing boundaries and pushing harder because they thought humans would always back down. What the other species did not know was that choosing peace and being unable to fight were completely different things. In the quiet spaces between diplomatic meetings, human military commander Junho was having very different conversations with his staff. His office was hidden deep in the human section of Unity Prime, where other species were not allowed to go. The walls were covered with star maps showing every human colony, every trade route, and every reported pirate attack. Red markers showed where human ships had been destroyed. Yellow markers showed where human civilians had been killed or kidnapped. Junho and his team were keeping track of everything. Every insult, every attack, every broken promise was being recorded and filed away. The humans were patient, but they were not stupid. They knew exactly who was taking advantage of their peaceful nature, and they were making lists. Lieutenant Minho worked late into the night, updating weapons systems that had not been used in centuries. The weapons were still there, still functional, still waiting. Humans had not forgotten how to fight, they had simply chosen not to fight. There was a big difference between the two things. Deep in human space, far from the diplomatic stations and trade centers, ancient military bases were quietly coming back to life. Weapons that had been stored in sealed chambers were being checked and maintained. Soldiers who had trained for wars that never came were updating their skills and learning new tactics. The humans were still hoping for peace. They still believed that talking was better than fighting. But they were also preparing for the possibility that talking might not be enough anymore. Captain Hyunwoo finished his watch at the observation window and walked back through the corridors of Unity Prime. He nodded politely to the alien species he passed and smiled at the younglings who stared at him with curious eyes. To them, he looked like just another peaceful human diplomat. They could not see the military training in the way he moved, or the tactical assessment he was making of every corridor and exit. They did not know about the concealed weapons built into his diplomatic uniform or the combat implants hidden beneath his skin. The galaxy saw humans as soft because humans chose to be diplomatic. What they did not understand was that the choice to be peaceful was only meaningful when you were strong enough to choose otherwise. A weak species that avoided war was not peaceful. They were just weak. But a strong species that chose peace over, or that was something different entirely. That was strength under control. That was power held in check by wisdom and compassion. The other species were about to learn the difference, and the lesson would be one that no species would ever forget.